So we want to create, I think it'll say construct, but create a polynomial that meets the following criteria. You're going to have, we want it to be fifth degree. We want 2 to be a 0 of multiplicity 4. 2 is a 0 of multiplicity 4. Negative 4 is the only other 0. And I have a leading coefficient of 3. Okay, so I have to construct a polynomial with that criteria. Fifth degree, 2 is a 0, multiplicity 4, negative 4 is the only other 0, and I have a leading coefficient of 3. So f of x equals what? What am I going to write here? Okay, 3x to the fifth would be my leading term, but wouldn't it be easier to write this in factored form since I know the zeros?
Yeah, straight up.
Okay, so if I write it in factored form, what would it look like?
It'd be
3?
3 parentheses
Okay.
x minus 2
Okay.
to the fourth power.
Okay.
And then x plus 1.
Wait, why is it to the fourth power?
Because it says it has a multiplicity of 4. That's what multiplicity means. Multiplicity is the number of times that 0 occurs. Okay? So let's see if we met all the criteria. Do we have a leading coefficient of 3?
Yes.
Yes. Negative 4 is the only other 0. That should be a not plus 1 then, right? That should be a plus 4. Okay, everybody good with that? So 2 is a 0 of multiplicity 4. So that means an x minus 2. The multiplicity of 4 means to the fourth power. Okay? All right, so now we have this as our polynomial. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Okay? Now what if I would have said, let's do the same problem, but let me change this 4 to a 3. If I change that to a 3,
Be minus 3. So. Oh, wait.
if I change that to a 3, how does that change the problem? I still want it to be a fifth. So I'd have to have a squared here, right? So you just need to adjust your powers to make sure you end up with a fifth degree. Okay? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So if this becomes a 3, then that would be a 3 and that would be a 2. Everybody okay with that example? Okay. All right. Example 7. This time I'm going to give you the polynomial, but I'm going to ask you specific things about it, specific characteristics. If I tell you that we have y equals, or f of x equals x plus 3 times x minus 2 to the 7th power, and I ask you for the degree, I ask you for the y-intercept, the x-intercepts, and also I ask you for any intercepts that flatten out. Okay?
Well,
So what do I have to do to find the degree?
you just got to combine all your x's.
So that means find the leading term, right?
Yep.
So the leading term would be equal to x times x to the 7th, right? Because here I have an x. Here I have an x to the 7th. So x to the 8th is my leading term, which means my degree is 8. Does that make sense? Okay, to find a y-intercept, how do I find a y-intercept?
0 for x.
Let x be 0. So if I let x be a 0, I'm going to end up with what? 0 plus 3 is 3. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. And that is to the 7th power. So that's going to be a big number that might require the calculator. I'll tell you 2 to the 5th is 32. So 2 to the 6th would be 64.
128.
So 128. And would it be negative or positive?
Negative.
Negative 128 times 3 is what we need. What is negative 128 times 3?
384.
Negative 384. So my y-intercept is at 0, comma, negative 384. That will be your y-intercept. Does that make sense?
Really do.
Okay, so x-intercepts. To find x-intercepts, I let y be 0. And if I let y be 0, that means I have two things multiplied together, or the answer is a 0. The only way that will ever happen is if this parentheses turns out to be a 0, or this parentheses turns out to be a 0. What would make this parentheses turn out to be a 0? What would make this one turn out to be a 0? So negative 3 and 2. So I have negative 3 comma 0 and 2 comma 0. Okay, so out of those x-intercepts, do either one of them flatten out?
The 2 doesn't.
This one flattens out because it's got a high power on it, right? Okay, so the only one that flattens out is the 2, 0. Now, the computer does this a little bit differently than I would. I would say anytime you have a power bigger than 2, it flattens out, right? But they say anything bigger than 1. So I don't really know why they consider a bouncer flattening out when the power's a 2. To me, it doesn't really flatten out until it becomes a 4 or a 6 and so on. But for this one, write in your notes, any power greater than 1 is considered to flatten out. Okay? Flattening out happens, according to the computer program, with any power that's greater than 1. So anytime you have a second power and it bounces, they're still going to consider that to flatten out. Okay? Okay, everybody okay with that? All right, example 8, last example. All right, so this one's in standard form instead of factored form. So we have x to the 4th minus 8x cubed plus 12x squared plus 24x minus 45. And we basically want the same information that we had on the last one. We want to know what's the degree, what's the y-intercept, what's the x-intercepts, and do any of those intercepts flatten out? Okay, so degree is an easy one. What's my degree? Okay, because it's already in standard form. The highest power of the first term is a 4. That's just my degree. How do I find a y-intercept? Plug in 0 for x. So if I plug in 0 for x, this will become 0, this will become 0, this will become 0, and this will become 0. So I'll essentially have 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 minus 45. Okay? So my y-intercept comes out to be 0, comma, negative 45. X-intercepts are a little tougher to find because I'm in standard form. How do I find x-intercepts when I'm in standard form? Type it in your calculator and see what you can see, right? Could cross up to 4 times, so type that in there and see what you can find. Okay, so by looking at the calculator, we can see that 3 and 5 are x-intercepts, and I'm assuming they're not bouncers if you could see 2 other weird ones. Okay, am I right?
Yeah, they're not bouncers.
Okay, so I have those 2, but there's 2 more. So to figure out those 2, I'm going to have to use synthetic division with the 3 and the 5 so that I can get it down to a quadratic and find the other 2. So 3 and a 5, synthetic division. So I will start my synthetic division with the 3.
Why couldn't you just use your calculator to find x?
Can you see them?
I mean, you can do the little thing where it tells you.
Okay, well, what did it tell you?
That is not
Not.
It says like 1.7.
Okay, so my coefficients are 1, negative 8, 12, 24, and negative 45. No powers missing, so I don't need to insert any zeros. So bring down the 1. And 1 times 3 is 3. Negative 8 and 3 is negative 5. Negative 15. Negative 3. Negative 9. What's 24 minus 9?
15.
Yep. 15 times 3 is 45. 45 and negative 45 is 0. And what was the other intercept I had? A 5? So now I'm going to do that row of numbers with a 5 so that I can get this thing down to a quadratic. So 1, 5, 0, 0, negative 3, negative 15, 0.
Oh man, it looks like quadratic to me.
So now I had an x to the 4th to start with, which makes this an x cubed, which makes this an x squared, which means I have 1x squared minus 3 equals 0. How can I solve that?
Move the 3 over and then square root.
Move the 3 over, square root. I get x is equal to
Positive or negative square root.
plus or minus the square root of 3. All right, so now I can go back to my factored form, fill that out with, or I guess not factored form, but my x-intercepts, radical 3 comma 0, and negative radical 3 comma 0. Okay? Do any of those flatten out? No, none of them do. None of them have a power higher than 1 if you write them in factored form. Okay? And that's everything. Everybody okay with that?